60,000.
60,000. 60,000 US dollars? Yeah, that's right. If you've ever been in a situation where you bet a strong hand on the river and then you were check raised by a very good player, I think you'll know where Aaron Zhang was in this hand on Bart Hanson. We're going to take a look at a recently played spot on the big Friday game of Hustler Casino Live. And we're going to do something a little bit different here today. We are going to play out of Aaron Zhang's hand here on the button, and we don't know what Garrett has. Andy also in the hand. We're going to show his hand, and then we will decide by looking at the spot what would we do in Aaron's particular situation.
Same card. Poker is hard.
If you want to read this.
Oh, this is yours, right? I'm sorry.
This is mine. I'm offering it if you want.
So the game is 100, 200, no limit, and Andy's in the straddle here for 400 with a 200 big blind ante, and we pick it up here with Garrett raising it up to 1,200 from the cutoff, and here's our first sort of inflection point here on the button. Aaron has Queen 10 offsuit, not a great hand, and also with a 3-blind structure, you are incentivized to 3-bet to drive people out of the blind. So I would be doing a lot more 3-betting in a 3-blind structure than say like in a 2-blind structure. I probably would just fold this hand here. Queen 10 off, definitely a troublesome hand, but Aaron decides to get in there. He makes the call, and it's actually going to get folded around here to Andy, and Andy has pocket 8s, and there's a little bit of graphical lag. JR is not in the hand, a little bit of graphical error. And Andy makes a quick call, and I think it's probably pretty close here for Andy. I think this is probably really maybe the absolute best hand that he would call. He probably starts to squeeze with 9s plus here, especially against a Garrett open and just a flat call from Aaron on the button. So it's definitely a pretty close spot, and they go to the flop 3-handed.
Yeah.
What
What do you want for it?
3 or 4?
4. Nice.
Dang.
What a cheater you are,
What
bro.
did I do?
No, no,
What
no.
an angle. I don't think I've ever seen that angle. You hang on to your
That
card.
was a slow roll on the month.
Check, 2K, call. Speeding it up for you guys.
Thank you.
So the board comes out 9-8-7, and you can see here that Andy has flopped bottom set, and if we're Aaron Zhang here, we flopped an open-ended straight draw. Now, some of the players were actually laughing a little bit at the table because of the graphic lag. JR actually he held on to his cards even though he wasn't in pre-flop. That's why we had that little bit of a graphical lag there, so he was sort of still in there, but it is 3 ways, it's 4,100. And gets checked over to Garrett. So Andy obviously trying to play a check raise. He actually checks as well. And then Aaron Zhang bets 2,000. So a little bit confusing. But if we're Aaron Zhang here and it gets checked over to us, we bet Queen 10, which I think is perfectly reasonable. And when it gets back over to Andy, obviously he's got a little bit of a decision. He could raise. He could just call. I kind of like a call here, just in case if Garrett was playing something like an overpair like aces, kings cautiously, you don't just really drive him out of the hand. The only thing for Andy is if he does play it this way, he's usually naturally going to check on the turn, and you'll see a lot of situations where it will just get checked right through on the turn. Now it gets over to Garrett, and I would say somewhat surprisingly, he also calls. So if we're in Aaron's spot here on the button and we bet this flop, and Andy calls, and then Garrett calls, there's a fair chance that Garrett might have an overpair here. He could also have some sort of backdoor draw containing a 10 or a jack in it, something like that. But he tends to play these boards somewhat cautiously, especially against competent players. And then we, of course, get this graphic lag, and Garrett says, I'll tell you what the action is. It went check, check, bet 2,000, call, and now I'm calling him. We're off to the turn.
You already done it today.
Do you like that? I know the action when I'm in the hand.
He does. Usually he's it.
So the turn comes out the 4 of diamonds, putting a backdoor diamond draw here out. And this is exactly what I was talking about with Andy's hand. Once he sort of does this action on the flop, he's going to naturally check on the turn. I'm sure he wasn't expecting Garrett probably to call that much, overcall on the flop. But if Aaron Zhang had a draw, and we're playing out of his perspective, and we do, if it gets checked over to him and he sees that both people call, both Andy and Garrett's going to be skewed towards having probably a lot of hands that are not going to fold the turn on this brick card, then I'm probably going to be checking back here a lot. This is one of the value of having suited hands, because if you had queen 10 of diamonds here, you could easily make the case for making it overbet here on the turn. But I think given this action, I'm probably just going to take my equity and check behind, take the card, and that's exactly what he does. He checks behind, and we're at 10,100 still on to the river.
River's the jack of diamonds. And Aaron makes the queen high straight. Wow. Quick fold from Andy. Doesn't even think about it. Bink is right, the usual suspect in the chat says. Michael Sorensen as well. Bink.
60,000.
Garrett is going to raise.
So the river is the jack of diamonds, which gives us, playing out of Aaron's spot, the nut straight. It also brings in a backdoor diamond draw. And if you're Andy, he's played this set of 8 slow, and I don't think there's really anything he can do here but check. This is obviously a terrible card for him, as anyone with a 10 has a straight, maybe someone who makes backdoor diamonds. So he checks rather quickly. Garrett also checks. Remember how he overcalled here on the flop. And now it's over to Aaron here on the button, and he has a really, really easy value bet. And the really question is just how much should you bet here? With the pot being 10,100, I think it's probably a little bit unlikely that Garrett has a 10, although it is possible. And he's really trying to target somebody for having a 10 here, or maybe someone that's going to make a hero call with 2 pair. Personally, I probably would have sized a little bit less. He goes for a 1.5x overpot, and you can see here that Andy just gets right out of the way. He just folds rather quickly, and now it's back around here to Garrett. And if we are Aaron, we're just sort of praying that Garrett has a 10 or has something that he's going to call us down with. I mean, I don't like it if I'm Aaron when Andy just folds, because he's usually the one that I'm trying to get the call from. If Garrett was just trying to play like an overpair in kind of a cautious way. But obviously something happens here that is very, very unexpected. Garrett raises it up here to 60,000, 4x the bet size, and now Aaron is in a real quandary, because he's overbet the river. And not only are river check raises pretty infrequent, but river check raises against overbets are really, really infrequent. Now, if I were in Aaron's spot, the first thing I would do is look at the pot odds. We're getting just under 2-1. And obviously I would take a look at the board texture. Garrett is representing a backdoor flush. Obviously we have queen 10. We beat any other 10. I don't think Garrett is just doing this with a bare 10. So whenever you're trying to figure out if somebody made a backdoor flush, you really got to go back and look at the flop distribution here, especially on rainbow board. Here it's 9-7-8 rainbow. So obviously Garrett can't have top pair and a backdoor diamond draw because the 9 of diamonds is out there. I think the other critical thing here is that Andy called our bet on the flop, and good fundamentally sound play, and Garrett does play this way post flop. You are really not supposed to overcall very light. So Garrett's not going to show up here with like ace king of diamonds, something like that, ace 4 of diamonds, maybe some hands that he might have if it was just heads up, but he's not going to overcall with those hands. So he has to have something. So what hands make diamonds here that he could have? Well, he could have like 8x of diamonds, 7x of diamonds, something like that. But if he's opening a suited connector, those would probably be 7-8 of diamonds, which would be 2 pair. And he can't have 9-7 or 9-8 of diamonds because the 9 of diamonds is out there. So ace-8 of diamonds, ace-7 of diamonds, something like that. I mean, that's 2 specific hands. The other things that he could have would be 10x of diamonds that checks this flop sometimes, like king 10, queen 10, ace 10 of diamonds. Or, and I think this is really, really important when you see what the river is, jack X of diamonds, queen jack of diamonds, king jack of diamonds, ace jack of diamonds, because those are gut shots to a 10 with a backdoor diamond draw. Well, of course, the river's the jack of diamonds, so he can't have those hands. So I think that that's a really, really key thing when looking at hand reading and trying to figure out what Garrett could have overcalling the flop. Because the river is the jack of diamonds, it cuts out all of those combinations. So I think this is much, much different as opposed to, like, say, if the river was the 6 of diamonds and we bet a straight, where Garrett could have those jack X of diamonds types of holdings. The other thing that I find kind of curious if I were Aaron is, if Garrett made a backdoor flush here, how often would he check the river? Maybe sometimes. Maybe he thinks that I have a 10 and I'll stab at it. But there has to be some frequency after he gets checked through that Garrett's going to bet the river. And I've seen him play this a lot where he overpots the river. His pause, too, on the river, to me, like in terms of live tempo, seemed somewhat curious. I would just have a very, very, very hard time folding the nut straight here with queen 10, given all that action, specifically, too, because it's the jack of diamonds here, which cuts out a good, say, 30 to 40% of all viable diamond draws that are the backdoor variety that Garrett overcalls the flop with. I think if I'm Aaron in here, I call, and I think it's a pretty square call, especially if I want to have hands to call with that aren't some flushes, even though I am going to have some flushes. This is really the best hand that I'm going to have that's not a flush. I call.
Aaron obviously not folding this, I don't think. Yo, he folds, my gosh! What a bluff from Garrett.
You always seem to take the first big one all the time.
Mm-hmm. I know everybody's scared in the beginning, so. He's a very scared player here. He usually plays very small game.
I thought 15 was a little...
Well, it must be nice to be Garrett. And then he gives Aaron Zhang a little ribbing at the end because Aaron Zhang is a super high-stakes player, plays in some of the biggest games in the world in Macau. So Garrett check-raised bluffed queens with the queen of diamonds. And I think if you asked Garrett, if he were to know if Aaron Zhang had queen 10 there, would he try that? I think he would have said no. I think Garrett got really, really lucky that he got an overfold there. What Garrett obviously was using was one of his blockers. He knew that Aaron couldn't have the queen of diamonds, which would cut down, obviously, on the possibility of him having some backdoor diamonds. I think the 10 of diamonds is actually a critical card that neither player had here, either Garrett or Aaron, but obviously it's better that Garrett has the queen of diamonds to sort of make this play. And he thought that Aaron might fold a 10, which is what Aaron was representing, although once you start to size even larger, it could just be all backdoor flushes. But obviously he thought that he could get Aaron off of a 10, and it ended up working. But I think that's a little bit of positive variance there for Garrett, because I really do think that that should have been a square call. But that was one of the more interesting spots I've seen all year on Hustler Casino Live. Do me a favor, if you did like this video, it took a long time to edit with all of the blackouts, blacking out the percentages, blacking out the graphics. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I will be in Los Angeles commentating on the big Phil Ivey game on Thursday night, and I'll also be commentating on Friday night at the end of September this week.